Welcome to Family Business Breakthroughs, where we bring you time-saving, money-making strategies to improve your business even more. With over 3 decades of experience serving multi-generational family businesses, we've got time-tested solutions that get you the results you're looking for. Listen in and get ready for your next breakthrough. I'm your host, Jim Berner. We continue our discussion about the 3 pillars of Meridian Method: vision, people, and money. And we started with vision, and now we're moved into people, where we've broken down company culture. We talked about leadership, and let's talk about our third component of people, which is execution. I have with me Betsi Bixby, founder and owner of Meridian Associates. Meridian is the leader in supporting family business owners, next gens, and their teams to achieve their goals of family legacy, growing their communities, and thriving their companies forward. And Meridian does this through one-on-one coaching, on-site strategic planning, live events, online education, financial analysis.
Tons
And
of things.
I know, Betsi, thanks for joining me today. And you have over 30 years experience supporting family businesses. Your insights come from real world practice, not academia, not theory.
Right.
We're in to talk about the things that really do work. And Betsi, you're a business owner, and business owners love getting things done. Uh,
Yes. Woo-hoo.
I'm assuming you love the component of execution. Am I right?
I adore execution. Yes, I do.
And, you know, when I always, think about when people first started their businesses, or whether it be their grandfather, grandmother, whoever it was that started it, they were sole proprietors. The only person that they were accountable to was themselves. And, but then you start adding people, which is really fun for sometimes, as we kind of talked about this. But things get more difficult when you start doing that. And so, as a business owner, or a leader, how do you foster this sense of ownership and accountability among your other team members?
Yeah, great starting question, Jim. And I see that there's really two components to getting that sense of ownership. I mean, there's a lot of things we could talk about, but the first thing is when you're working with people on what it is that you want, the results that you want from them, that is a team effort. And in fact, in
Mm,
Meridian's method, a lot of times when you're working with senior leaders, you just ask them, what do you think are the results that you can achieve? And you wait for the answer. So engaging people in the goal setting. So it's
mm,
not just a top down, that's number one. And as far as creating ownership, because again, they feel like they had a say in it. The second thing is that when you decide what those results are from that particular person, from that team member, ask them their confidence level in actually getting it done. And in Meridian, we use a 1 through 10 confidence level. We love that. We talked about it when we were talking about vision, I think, too, is that, it's great to be setting goals and taking ownership and, all the good stuff. But at the end of the day, with execution, it is, did it get done? And did it get done on time and on budget? And
mm,
in this case, because we're talking about people here, asking the person who's responsible for the results on a 1 to 10, where 10 is you feel totally confident and 1 is like there's no way it's going to get done. Where are you in that scale? And
mhm,
then if they're anything less than a 10, find out what is um, impeding them from being a 10, or ask them what they can do to be, 1 notch more confident. So that to me is the foundation. When we have agreed upon goals with our people and they have expressed a confidence level that yes, I can get this done, and they're not concerned about something you don't know about, now we have a home run. We're like, okay, they're engaged, they're ready to roll, they've taken ownership of what they need to do.
So I really want to just sit right there for a second because this is a tool right off the bat. Asking confidence level 1 to 10. I love
Yep.
self reflection. I think that it's one of the most powerful tools that we can use for ourselves. And as you mentioned, how do we get there? Because it really makes you ask. You might be sitting in the seat at the conference room table and you're saying, "Okay, this is a great plan," but then you get asked, "Well, how confident are you?" And so now you start thinking through it a little bit more.
Yep.
So I love that. It's a great tool. So I'm somebody who loves hitting goals. I love the targets. I love being able to go after something, but sometimes it doesn't always happen. And in your experience, what are the typical reasons why execution doesn't happen? Why does it fail?
Okay, so I'm going to go outside of just a rotten system, and we're just talking people here today. Okay, so it's not that we have a failed system; is we actually have a person problem, and so the reason why people don't hit goals and targets. So again, goals that they have um, engaged with, they've agreed to, they have a 10 confidence level, right? The first thing I would say is they don't schedule time to do what they need to do to hit the goal. So it's a poor time management system, it's poor calendaring, it's whatever it is, or they don't estimate the time correctly that is needed to actually do what needs to do. The other thing I see, the number two is, and it's still a kind of a lack of planning, is that they haven't thought about risks and obstacles. Like what could impede their progress, right? One of the amazing tips I picked up from a really cool business leader, had about 3,500 people underneath her, was every morning she would say, "What's the three most important things I need to do today?" But what
Mm,
was really different about this is then she used to, it's the old 3x5 cards, is what she was using at the time. She'd flip it over and say, what are the five biggest obstacles that could happen that would derail this, that would keep me from getting this done? And I think that should be part of the planning as well, is to say, what are the possible obstacles that could happen? Jim, you've seen it with our own team. A lot of times we're doing technology. We're like, okay, we're going to kick off this, new XAD or whatever it is that we're doing. And then it's like, oh, shoot, there's just these physical things that we didn't know. Oh, they've got a 1 week waiting period or whatever it is. So that kind of planning. And then the third, so I've got time allocation, kind of the lack of planning
mhm,
for risks and obstacles. The third would be outside factors. And a lot of people say, well, I can't do anything about outside factors, they're outside of my control. And my answer to that is yes, you can. And the way that you do that is you build in what I call margin, time margin. So when you're scheduling, you figure out that stuff could happen and you just build in a little bit of extra time for the things that you might have to cope with along the way. I work with, as you know, CEOs, family business leaders, and we talk about their scheduling. And a lot of times and I do it myself sometimes, just scheduled back to back. Like you just, the one meeting ends at 2 o'clock and you start their 1:59 and you start the next one at 2 o'clock. You have to build margin into
mhm.
both your day-to-day schedule and into your project and your goal achievement schedules. So build in that little bit of fudge room margin, whatever you want to call it, and that will really help you to hit the goals and targets better.
These are really good things to be able to think about in addition to for people to just even have on a checklist. Hey, have we
Oh
thought
yeah.
about this? When you're putting this out, how do I think about the risks or the obstacles that are there besides just building whatever the project is? These are great ways of being able to ask these outside of the box questions. So these are awesome here.
Thank
So
you,
now
sir.
let's you bet. So so now let's say we got, you're sitting down at a table, you're about to approach a team that maybe hasn't, they haven't executed as planned. How do you engage that team to reflect upon why they didn't hit that goal?
Yeah, well, you already did it. You asked the question, "Hey, what were the lessons learned? What got in the
Mm,
way? What kept us from meeting our goal?" And then more importantly, what can we do going forward so that we do hit our goal? So you want them to look at, what got in the way, not in a blame way, but in a way of how do we fix this going forward. And
Mhm.
my question that I ask a lot of times is when there's been some sort of error or a target miss is, so what do we need to do going forward so we never miss this again?
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
that forces you to start thinking about possibility thinking. Well, what do we need to
Mhm.
do so that we don't have this miss? So I think lessons learned are always super good things to be talking about when you have missed a target and really looking hard. I was just working with a team. It was really interesting, and they've gotten, like a lot of our Empower companies, they're growing, they're getting more complicated, and they said, "Oh,
Mhm.
well, we're gonna break out. We're gonna have this really cool, profit center divisional analysis, and everything was supposed to be done by
Wow.
today. And guess what? They weren't there."
Yeah.
And so, as they got into the project, and Jim, you can really appreciate this, they realized that some of the data that they were importing was actually corrupted. And it's like
Oh,
garbage
wow.
in, garbage out, right?
Right.
Now, that is not a people thing, or could be, it's a system thing. And we've talked about systems before. You got to really look at the systems. But
Mhm.
in this case, it's like, ooh, somebody didn't really think through about a step in there about scrubbing the state or whatever. Now, here's the
Mhm.
cool thing. The leader that's in charge of that project, he is a can-do guy. In fact, you met him at one of our events last fall, and I won't say who it is because we keep everything confidential here at Meridian. But I have every confidence that now that he's figured out the lessons learned, as we talked about,
Mhm. Right.
that he knows how to correct that going forward. And actually, this is a great example, Jim, because what he realized is that there's another team of people where they're not really inputting the data correctly. So even though he
Mm.
was importing the fields and it should have been right, guess what?
Yeah.
There were some people at the other end that weren't doing what he thought they were doing. It's like,
Oh,
woohoo,
man.
discovery. Yeah. So,
S
yep.
so when you're in these conversations, whether it be, your own team or the people that you're coaching, do you look for the language that they're using to describe maybe what the challenge was, and if they're kind of using accountability or if they're trying to blame? Because I know we talk about this all the time, using accountability or blame. Do you look for that language and
Oh,
how they're doing
absolutely.
it?
Absolutely. Yeah. And teams that really want to win and are having that accountability, he didn't say, "Oh, it's all their fault," right? He
Sure.
didn't, that didn't come out that way. The way that it came out, which was really great, is we need to do more training so that the imports coming in are super
Mm.
accurate, right?
Yeah.
And then actually on the same line, we were doing a team meeting, and the guy who was in charge of that team who was doing those inputs was in
Mhm.
total agreement. So, and it may be that because they're growing and they're adding on people, that there might be a little training issue in there too, right?
Mhm.
Where it's like, oh, I didn't even know I was supposed to do that or whatever.
Yeah.
So yeah, so it's just yes, Jim. I One of the things that we teach, and you're well aware of this, is that above the line thing, right?
Mhm.
Where
Yeah.
blame, justification, guilt, all those things. We don't want to go there. That's all below the line. It's all counterproductive. It's all about self responsibility and what can I do to make this right. So it's all good.
Yeah, that's one of the a great resource that people can find on Meridian members for sure. Is that piece that you were just talking about? It popped into my head because as we're talking right now, it's the new president that's coming in, Donald Trump, and they were talking about The Office, and they made reference to the buck stops here, and
Uh
so it
huh.
made me think about, okay, great, it's accountability. You're taking responsibility for
Oh
everything
yeah.
that's coming your way, so it made me just kind of think about that as well.
Yeah. It's
Um,
awesome.
as we started our journey, through Meridian method of, vision, people, money, we talked about systems, which is under vision, and people and execution right now. So, how do you know when you have a people problem versus a systems problem? And then when do you make a change on that people side?
Yeah, so the systems problem is easy, and we covered that. We talked about flow
Hmm.
charting and looking at the system and all of that and the steps. You have a person problem when yeah, it's kind of like self-evident because you get people that don't want to change, they don't want to
Mhm.
use the system, they may actually be sabotaging.
Mm.
It's really interesting. I mean, I've seen some of the craziest stuff where and then it's like, well, is it purposeful, is it out of fear, like I'm going to lose my job if I, they if my job goes away, I'm going to make sure that my job doesn't go away. So, all those crazy things that
Right.
go on.
Right.
So, we're big believers in having those one on one conversations with people. And when you see that there's a person, and it does get hidden, it's the weirdest thing, especially when it's at a high level leader. Um, Sometimes it's hard to decipher, and you think, well, it can't be that person.
Mm.
They would never do that. They're a leader in that position. I'm thinking about a company that had a CFO, and this guy was just hiding so many things. And
Mm.
you know and but had been with the company for like 30 years. It's like
Wow.
crazy, right?
It's
And
yeah.
but I've seen that where people get in over their head. Like, we work with a lot of growing companies, and what happens is that everything that they could control and do all of a sudden is now exponentially more. And yet, instead of saying I'm drowning or I need extra people or whatever it is, it's like they just keep trying to do what they're doing, and they can't, and it just
Mm.
gets overwhelming, and it's a bad deal. So I would say to any leader, have that discussion with the person. You'll know, because again, you're not hitting your
Mhm.
goals. You don't see the vision, being executed the way you want it to be. That's worthy of a one-on-one discussion. Don't do it publicly, but do it privately and say, hey, you agreed to do this. Here's the date that you agreed to do it by. Help me to
Mhm.
understand what's going on here. But when you consistently get like excuses, and it's kind of like, I'm not sure I'm really buying the excuses, that then becomes a person who's not taking total responsibility.
Right.
The self responsible person will say, oh my gosh, you're right. I should have done this differently. I'm going to do this differently. Um, but even then, sometimes there's only so much you should do before you change a person.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is, this conversation is so relevant right now as we start 2025. Everybody's talking about strategic planning if they haven't
Oh, yeah.
already done something. You're having these conversations all the time now. Um, but as they move forward and the goals and the targets they're being set, um, what role does feedback play in the actual execution strategy and achieving your goals and targets?
Oh my gosh, it's huge because, again, you're counting on these people for execution. And one of the mistakes that young or inexperienced leaders make is they don't have touch points with their people. They say, okay, here's the goals, and it's like you give them everybody's agreed at the beginning, and then you have this date at the end, but
Hmm.
there's no discussion in between.
Right.
And so that feedback, Jim, is huge to say,
Hmm.
okay, where are we going? And in our system of communication with people is like, we're having weekly touch points, we're having daily huddles.
Hmm.
Our strategic planning group is every single month, making sure that we're on target, all those things. And when we're off target, it's a big self reflection to say, okay, why are we off target? And
Hmm.
just as importantly, when we blew out the target, when we've had extreme success, which I love, and we see a lot in our Empower companies, it's like, what did we do to have that? Right. So sometimes what happens is when companies are super successful and they're blowing out their targets, they don't stop to reflect on, well, how did that happen?
Right.
So that we can go keep doing that.
Right.
So it's very interesting. So the feedback and the self reflection is super important, and team reflection, because I think when you have good teams, they'll support each other in that way, in that reflection as well.
Yeah. And even from, just to kind of add on there, because I know that you do a lot of this really well, which is the one on one feedback,
Mm.
from a personal standpoint, from, even just a team member executing and achieving their goals, which is, how well are you doing? Again, you always use the 1 to 10 strategy as you previously mentioned, and how do you get one step further? So, yeah, that feedback is, and it's for someone like myself, I'm like, I'm always wanting feedback. I always want to
Yeah.
be better. Um, and
That's
so
because you're an A player.
I try as hard as I can. And as people, talk about, strategic goals, and as they're looking at this not only for 2025, we've talked about vision, and they're talking about maybe like their 5-year goals. And so, how do you balance the long term objectives with the immediate need for results on the day to day execution?
Yeah. So you have to have that long term vision, right? Because people have to see the target. And, what just came to my mind, have you ever shot a bow and arrow, Jim?
I have. I was a Boy
Yeah.
Scout. I was
Ah,
second
there we go. Okay.
second
Awesome.
second year Weeblo, second year
There
Weeblo.
you go. All right. Yeah. My brother was an Eagle Scout. So I was kind of
Pack
raised in all that.
173. Shout out to Pack 173, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania.
Oh, that's awesome. All right. So I think about that long-term vision of, you've got that target out in the distance, right? And the execution for right now is, if you don't pick up the bow, if you don't pick up your arrow, if your arrow isn't actually the correct arrow for what you're trying to do, that's the system, right? And
Mhm.
then you've got to actually do something. So that action that you take in the immediate is what's going to get you to that goal. So it's like, we've got to have both. We got to know what we're shooting at, but then we've got to have our tools and the thing that we have to do right now to get that done. Right. So if you showed up to the archery range and you got no bow and you got no arrow, nothing's going to happen. You are not going to hit the target, right?
Right.
So, yeah, so we have to balance. It's a balancing act, right? But when we don't execute in the short term, what happens is we don't get to the long term goal.
Mm.
Like,
Mhm.
it's just a step by step path. There's a scripture in Psalms that talks about God, lighting a lamp to your feet, and that's like He's going to show you one step at a time. And that's how I
Mm.
I see these kind of goals and execution is, you've got to have that next step. You've got to be able to know what's the next thing to do. You've got that target in your sights for the long term. And sometimes, we move the target and, the steps have to change, but it's those little steps that you're taking along the way that are going to actually get you to where you're going.
Oh, yeah. It's really, when you gave that, analogy of, the bow and arrow, I think of momentum, being pulling it back, and you're
Oh
just like
yeah.
on the cusp of like, really letting it go and flying and really seeing something happen, and those little wins every single time.
Mm, yep.
That's the first thing that kind of comes to my mind. Um, so we're kind of wrapping this up in, for business owners, to maximize their chances of successfully executing their goals and targets. What advice could you give them right now to like really expedite their chances?
Yes. I would say, first off, clear communication and engaging people in the process. Ask the confidence levels like we talked about. But one more thing, Jim, is catch them doing the small little pieces in the beginning right,
Mm,
and give them kudos. And that's where those checkpoints come in, and just give them the reinforcement that you're on the right path, you're doing the right things. And when they have snags, the leader's real role is to serve the people that they're leading. So it's your job to find out if they're having any snags, and then either help them solve that or ask them the question that will develop them into the kind of people that will develop the solutions. Um, Depending upon where they are in their leadership journey and what you're doing with them, get them engaged in solving their own situations. But you should always be a resource, and they should never be afraid to come to you. We're kind of on leadership now a little bit, but
sure.
they should never be afraid to come to you and say, I'm not going to make this goal. And here's why. And here's where I have a snag. And it's your job then to help them to get that solved.
Mm, yeah. That's really good. Yeah, because the leadership portion, even though you mentioned we kind of talked about that, it's so instrumental in being able to keep people on the right track, build the momentum within them to be able to, feel powerful, to be able to achieve the goals, right?
Absolutely.
Because if you have somebody, nagging on you and tearing you down, telling you what's not right, they're certainly not going to be able to execute. They're going to be hesitant, especially when it
Right.
comes to making a decision. When we talked about that too. So, this is great. Clear communication. The 1 to 10 rating, I think, is extremely powerful. It makes people think well outside the box, whether it be for your leaders or for just your team members. And giving the feedback, never forget the feedback of doing that. We talked about poor time management, risks, obstacles, outside factors that could really hinder your ability to be able to do this. So, this is really good on how they can maximize everything we talked about, can help maximize their chances of executing their goals, especially here in 2025. So, I want to encourage everybody again to go back and listen to some of the other episodes, because these all, as Betsy we're talking about here, they start to really blend together.
They
You're
intertwine.
you're
Yeah.
really,
Yep.
learning the power of what is really happening between all of these and how they're all super important. They all pull and push on each other. So,
Yep.
really powerful here. So, again, I want to thank you for your time today. Sharing the insight as always, and again, encouraging people to go back, pause at certain points, jot down notes. This is all super actionable that you can start using literally today as you start talking to your people. Everyone listening, message me your questions, your comments. I want to hear from you. My contact information is down in the show notes, so feel free, email me over. As a reminder, Meridian is here to serve you, your family. If you're looking for succession planning, leadership, next gen coaching, you want to attend one of our awesome events, or check out all the show description and the notes for the links to our website on how we can help. Um, Thank you for listening in, Betsy. I want to thank you so much for your time today, and
Thank you, Jim.
we'll see everybody on the next Family Business Breakthroughs.